Tony Yayo owns a $12 million empire and a lake. Not a house near a lake, not a vacation property, a private lake. And that is just one piece of what he has built since the G-Unit days. The real estate portfolio, the touring money, the media empire, the record label he runs as CEO, all of it adds up to something that most people in hip-hop never saw coming from him. Stay with us because how he built this is a story worth telling from the beginning. Yo, what's good, fam? Today we are breaking down Tony Yayo's empire. We are getting into the real estate portfolio, the private property with lake access, the $1 million he came home to after prison, how 50 Cent shaped his financial mindset, and why his hustle off the mic might be even more impressive than anything he ever put on record. Let's get into it. Before we get into the empire, let me keep it 100 with y'all about who Tony Yayo actually is, for people who might be catching up, because his story starts long before the G-Unit chain and the Platinum Records. And understanding where he came from is the only way to fully appreciate where he ended up. Tony Yayo was born Marvin Bernard on March 31st, 1978, in South Jamaica, Queens, New York. If you know anything about South Jamaica during the 1980s and 1990s, you know it was an environment that produced either casualties or survivors. Marvin Bernard survived it, and more than that, he came out of it with the closest thing he would ever find to a family outside of his actual family, which was the bond he built with his childhood friends Curtis Jackson, who would become 50 Cent, and Darius Rose, who would become Lloyd Banks. The three of them grew up together, hustled together, rapped together, and eventually built something together that none of them could have predicted from the corners of South Jamaica. When G-Unit formed, it was not a label strategy, it was a crew. And Tony Yayo was as foundational to that crew as anyone. The G-Unit era is something that younger hip-hop fans might know about through YouTube documentaries and retrospective interviews. But for people who lived through it in real time, the scale of what 50 Cent and G-Unit accomplished between 2003 and 2008 was genuinely unprecedented. The group was everywhere simultaneously in a way that no rap crew had managed before them. G-Unit clothing was in every mall. The music was on every radio station. The energy of that era was specific, and it has not been replicated since, which is part of why G-Unit nostalgia continues to drive arena-level ticket sales decades later. The first thing to understand about how G-Unit actually worked as a business is that 50 Cent built the infrastructure before most people even knew the name. By the time Get Rich or Die Trying was ready to drop, 50 had already secured a deal with Shady Records and Aftermath under Eminem and Drive Dre respectively. He was signed to Interscope. He had a joint venture for G-Unit Records that allowed the crew to release their own projects under a major label umbrella while retaining ownership of the imprint itself. That structure, where you are a major label artist but also running your own label inside that deal, was not common for rappers at the time. And it is what separated the kind of wealth G-Unit generated from what most hip-hop acts of that era experienced. The money was coming in at multiple levels simultaneously. The G-Unit era was not just culturally dominant, it was financially extraordinary in a way that changed the trajectory of everyone involved. When Get Rich or Die Trying dropped in February 2003 and sold over 872,000 copies in its first week, becoming the fastest-selling debut in history at the time, it created an economic engine that ran for years. The group released Beg for Mercy in 2003, and it sold over 1 million copies. They had touring deals, merchandise revenue, Reebok deals, vitamin water relationships, and a recording infrastructure that generated income at multiple levels simultaneously. Tony Yayo was part of all of it. The G-Unit brand was on everything, and every piece of it had value. The financial structure that 50 Cent built also meant that G-Unit's revenue streams were multiplied in ways that a traditional rapper deal would never allow. Touring income from the 50 Cent Get Rich tour and subsequent G-Unit tours ran into the tens of millions. Merchandise, which 50 Cent controlled through G-Unit clothing, generated its own separate revenue that did not depend on album sales. The vitamin water investment, while it would not pay off until the 2007 Coca-Cola acquisition, was already in place before Get Rich even dropped. This was an operation being built like a corporation from the very beginning, and everyone who was inside the G-Unit world was part of an income-generating machine that operated at a level most hip-hop crews never came close to. But here is where Tony Yayo's story gets complicated in the way that only street stories can. While 50 Cent was releasing Get Rich, While G-Unit was becoming the biggest rap group on the planet, Tony Yayo was in prison. He had been incarcerated on a weapons charge, and he served approximately 14 months before being released. He came home to a world that had completely transformed around him. G-Unit was no longer a local crew from Queens. It was an international brand, and he had missed the initial explosion. What he did not miss was the financial support that 50 Cent had arranged for him. This is the detail that separates Tony Yayo's story from a lot of other prison release narratives in hip-hop. When he walked out of custody, 50 Cent made sure he did not walk out empty-handed. In an interview with the Associated Press around the time of his debut album release, Yayo himself confirmed the famous story. He came out of prison with $1 million. That was not a rumor. That was not street mythology. The interviewer said it directly, and Yayo confirmed it. $1 million waiting for him when he got out, provided by the man he had grown up with, the man who had made it to the other side and made sure his brother made it too. That moment is one of the most significant in understanding how Tony Yayo was positioned financially from the very beginning of his post-prison life. Real talk, coming home to $1 million changes your entire relationship with money and with decisions. Most people who leave federal custody leave with whatever was in their pockets when they went in. They leave with debt. They leave with a lack of opportunities. Tony Yayo left with a foundation, and the question was what he was going to build on top of it. What happened in the immediate aftermath of his release is something that a lot of people in hip-hop know about but do not fully process in terms of what it means financially. Coming home is hard. The re-entry period after any period of incarceration involves enormous practical challenges. Where do you live? How do you generate income? What are your legal obligations on parole or supervised release? How do you navigate a world that has changed significantly during the time you are away? For most people who come home from prison, those questions are answered with very limited resources. Tony Yayo answered them with $1 million in hand and a global platform waiting for him the moment he was cleared to perform publicly. His debut album, Thoughts of a Predicate Felon, dropped in August 2005 and sold over 200,000 copies in its first week. The lead single, So Seductive, featuring 50 Cent, peaked at number 48 on the Billboard Hot 100 and charted internationally, reaching the top 30 in both Ireland and the United Kingdom. This was not a vanity project. It was a genuine commercial release that confirmed Yayo could hold his own as a solo artist, even with the enormous shadow of 50 Cent's success surrounding him. The album generated touring opportunities, radio play, and continued revenue from the G-Unit ecosystem that was still running at full capacity. But here's where it gets real interesting. Because while many artists at his level were spending their earnings on jewelry, luxury cars, and the kind of highly visible consumption that hip-hop culture celebrated at the time, Tony Yayo was paying attention to a different lesson. The lesson that 50 Cent was teaching everyone around him, loudly and repeatedly, was that music money was temporary, but ownership was forever. 50 was not simply getting rich. He was investing in Glaso vitamin water in the early 2000s in a deal that would eventually return him somewhere between $100 and $400 million when Coca-Cola acquired the company. He was buying property. He was building entertainment infrastructure that could generate revenue independent of whether he had a hit single on the radio. And Tony Yayo was watching all of it from the inside. The real estate investments that form the foundation of Tony Yayo's estimated $12 million empire represent the most direct application of the lessons he learned during the G-Unit years. He moved into property ownership while the music was still generating income, which is exactly what financial advisors recommend, but that most musicians never actually do, because the appeal of immediate spending is too strong. Yayo reportedly acquired a luxury penthouse in Manhattan's Battery Park City area during the height of his success, a purchase that would have been in a market that has appreciated significantly over the years since. New York City real estate, particularly at the higher end of the market, has shown remarkable long-term value growth. An early entry into that market translates to significant portfolio appreciation over time. But here's where we need to break down exactly what the $12 million empire actually looks like, because that number does not come from one source. It is a portfolio. The foundation is New York real estate, including a reported luxury penthouse in Manhattan's Battery Park City area that he acquired during the height of his commercial success. Manhattan property at that tier has appreciated significantly over the past 2 decades. An early entry into that market means the current value is substantially higher than what he paid. Alongside the New York holdings, he owns private acreage with lake frontage in a rural setting, a completely different category of asset that provides both privacy and long-term land value. That property alone represents the kind of investment that wealthy people make specifically because natural water access cannot be manufactured. You cannot build a lake. The supply is fixed and the demand keeps growing. Beyond real estate, the empire includes his ongoing touring income from G-Unit's international arena shows, his revenue from Welcome to the Culture, and his digital media presence. His CEO position at G-Unit Philly, which gives him equity participation in developing artists, and his entertainment investments, including the Lake George Film Project. Each of those revenue streams is modest on its own, but combined and accumulated over 2 decades, they produce a portfolio that reaches the $12 million range. This is money he made from one hit record. This is money he built through layers. Now let's talk specifically about the lake, because that is the detail that stops people cold when they hear it. The private lakefront property Tony Yayo owns is in the northeastern United States, a region where acreage with natural water access has been one of the most consistently appreciating asset classes for decades. The post-pandemic real estate market specifically drove demand for private rural properties with outdoor space and natural features to levels that made early holders of those assets significantly wealthier. For someone who grew up in the concrete density of South Jamaica, Queens in the 80s and 90s, owning land that extends far enough to include a private lake is not simply a financial statement. It is the physical manifestation of exactly how far the journey from those corners has taken him. Privacy, space, water, everything that South Jamaica did not offer, and everything that real long-term wealth eventually makes possible. The contrast between his upbringing and where he sits today is one of the things that makes his story genuinely compelling. Dense urban housing, minimal personal space, survival as the daily framework, followed decades later by a private lake on private acreage. That distance is measured in more than miles. Now let's talk about the loyalty dimension of his financial story, because it is something that a lot of people overlook when they discuss his empire. Tony Yayo has been approached multiple times over the years about tell-all projects, book deals, and interview opportunities that would have required him to expose behind-the-scenes information about G-Unit and about 50 Cent. These opportunities reportedly came with significant financial offers. He turned them down consistently. The most notable recent version of this dynamic involves 50 Cent reportedly offering Tony Yayo $5 million to start his own podcast and stop doing interviews on outside platforms like Black TV, where candid discussions about G-Unit's internal dynamics have the potential to generate their own kind of controversy. Whether Yayo accepted that specific offer or not, the broader pattern is clear. He has consistently chosen long-term relationship value over one-time payouts, and that approach has preserved both his business relationships and his access to future opportunities. Let me break down for y'all what that actually means financially. When you are a founding member of G-Unit and 50 Cent continues to bring you on international arena tours, you are not just collecting a paycheck for nostalgia value. You are participating in one of the most reliable revenue streams in veteran hip-hop. G-Unit remains a globally recognized brand. When 50 Cent tours, he tours at the arena level, filling venues in the United States and Europe with audiences that span multiple generations of rap fans. The income generated from those tours is substantial, and Tony Yayo continues to be part of that income picture because he is part of the authentic history that audiences are paying to see. Burning that bridge for a one-time book deal would have cost him far more in the long run than any advance could have compensated for. There is something else worth talking about when it comes to Tony Yayo's financial picture that does not get enough attention. G-Unit Philly. He has been operating as CEO of G-Unit Philly, the Philadelphia-based extension of the G-Unit recording infrastructure, which represents his own lane within the broader G-Unit ecosystem. Being a CEO of a record label, even an independent one operating under a larger umbrella, means equity participation in the artists you develop, potential publishing rights, and a long-term income stream that does not require you to perform or record personally. If any artist coming through G-Unit Philly breaks through in a meaningful commercial way, Tony Yayo participates in that success as an executive rather than as a performer. That is the kind of structural wealth building that separates people who last financially from people who do not. The digital media side of his empire is another revenue stream that deserves attention. Welcome to the Culture is his media platform, And his regular presence on major interview channels, including Vlad TV, has kept him in front of audiences that constantly discover or rediscover G-Unit's history. Every new generation that discovers 50 Cent's music eventually finds his way to Tony Yayo through the interview content he produces, which means his relevance has a renewable quality that many artists from his era have lost. Digital media revenue through advertising, sponsorships, and platform partnerships has become a significant income stream for veteran artists who understand how to leverage their credibility and their stories for ongoing engagement. The touring income picture also deserves a more detailed examination because people underestimate how much money veteran artists continue generating through live performance. When 50 Cent launches an international tour, he is not playing mid-sized venues. He is playing arenas and festival stages in the United States, the United Kingdom, Australia, Europe, and markets across the globe that have been consuming hip-hop for decades. Tickets at those levels generate gross revenue in the millions per show. The performers who come out alongside him, who are part of the authentic G-Unit package that audiences are buying tickets to see, participate in that revenue through their performance deals. Tony Yayo appearing on a tour that grosses tens of millions globally is not a nostalgia gig. It is a legitimate income-generating opportunity at a scale that most artists from his era never maintained access to. His involvement in entertainment beyond music further diversifies the portfolio. Film projects including Lake George have given him exposure in independent entertainment in ways that extend his brand while potentially generating returns through distribution deals and streaming rights. These are not the kinds of projects that generate immediate blockbuster numbers, but they contribute to the overall diversification of income that prevents any single revenue stream from becoming the entire foundation of his financial picture. The total picture of Tony Yayo's estimated $12 million empire is the result of layering each of these elements on top of each other across decades of disciplined decision-making. The original $1 million from 50 Cent was a seed. The album sales and touring income from the G-Unit peak years were the early growth. The real estate purchases during that period were the long-term investments. The continued touring, the digital media presence, the entertainment projects, and the loyalty that preserved his ongoing relationship with one of hip-hop's most successful business minds are the ongoing returns. None of it happened by accident. None of it happened because Tony Yayo got lucky. It happened because he paid attention to the right lessons at the right time and made decisions that prioritized wealth over visibility. The story of Tony Yayo also exists in contrast to what happened to some of the other artists who came up alongside him during the same era. And that contrast is worth sitting with because it illustrates exactly why his financial decisions matter. Hip-hop history from the early 2000s is full of artists who generated significant money during brief commercial peaks and then found themselves in difficult financial situations when the commercial peaks passed. Bankruptcy filings, tax liens, properties lost. The pattern is well documented, and it exists because the music industry creates income that feels enormous in the moment, but that requires disciplined management to preserve across the long term. Tony Yayo is not in those stories. He is in a different story entirely. Now, this ain't just about money. This is about what Tony Yayo represents for people who grew up in environments like South Jamaica, Queens. The idea that someone from that specific corner of the world could translate rap career success into a diversified portfolio that includes Manhattan real estate and private lakefront property is not simply a personal achievement. It is a demonstration of what is possible when the music money is used as a tool rather than a reward. The reward is the lake. The tool was everything that came before it. The real question, though, is what does Tony Yayo's financial story mean for how we talk about wealth in hip-hop? For a long time, the conversation about rapper wealth has been dominated by the most visible versions of it. The mansions that show up on Instagram, the jewelry that gets photographed at events, the cars that get posted on social media. The public financial life of a celebrity rapper has become its own genre of content, and the artists who generate the most visibility in that space get the most credit for financial success, regardless of whether that visibility reflects actual wealth or just spending. Tony Yayo does not operate in that space. He does not post his real estate portfolio on Instagram. He does not show off the lake property on social media. He exists in the rap world as someone who is known for his music and his loyalty and his interviews, not for his financial status. And in a culture that often equates financial success with public spending, that kind of quiet wealth is the most underrated kind of all. And yet, The financial status is there, quietly, appreciating. At the end of the day, Tony Yayo's story is about what happens when loyalty meets discipline. He stayed loyal to G-Unit when it would have been easier to take shortcuts. He turned down offers that would have paid him more money in the short term, or would have cost him everything in the long term. He watched 50 Cent build wealth from the inside of that operation and applied the lessons directly to his own financial decisions. He stayed disciplined with his money when it would have been easier to spend it on the lifestyle that hip-hop culture made look mandatory. And decades after his peak years as a recording artist, he is sitting on a portfolio that most people who never heard his music would still envy. The veteran rapper from South Jamaica, Queens, who came home to $1 million from his best friend, who stayed loyal when loyalty cost him money and stayed disciplined when discipline cost him the spotlight, quietly turned that foundation into an empire that includes a private lake. Most people who grew up where he grew up never get close to that outcome. He got there and he built it to last. That is one of hip-hop's most underrated success stories, and now you know it. Think about the full arc of what we just walked through. A kid from South Jamaica, Queens grows up with 50 Cent and Lloyd Banks. They build a rap crew that becomes a global brand. He goes to prison during the peak of that brand's rise. He comes home to $1 million. He releases a debut album that moves 200,000 copies in a week. He invests in Manhattan real estate during the height of his commercial success. He acquires private acreage with lake access. He stays loyal to his crew when offers come to do otherwise. He becomes CEO of a record label. He keeps touring internationally. He builds a digital media presence that keeps him relevant across generations of fans. He participates in independent film, and he ends up with an estimated $12 million portfolio that most people in the world would be deeply envious of. That is not a story about luck. That is a story about making the right calls at the right moments and having the discipline to let those calls accumulate into something real. Drop your thoughts in the comments and subscribe so you never miss a story like this. 1.